DFS. It is Friday, November 26th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 12 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola, and this podcast is sponsored by our partners at Fanshare Sports. Fanshare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com, and you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at FanshareSports.com. Jared, it's goofy week, as we've talked about, with Thanksgiving in the middle of it. I think that's probably going to make it a little bit more difficult to kind of read the ownership projections and the landscape heading into this weekend than it usually is. I know I am not sure exactly what to expect from player ownership projections heading into Sunday right now.
Yeah, I think we're just kind of behind, right? Like we spent the first couple of days of the week prepping for the Thanksgiving slate where I lost all my money. So that didn't go well, but, hoping to make it back on Sunday here. And it's also a 10-game slate, so it's smaller than we've been playing recently. And it's, by the Vegas implied totals, it looks like a lower scoring slate. There's no teams with big implied totals this week.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting slate to look at for those reasons. I'll be curious to see all the numbers Sunday morning. I did not put a whole lot of money into yesterday because I was scared to do so. We at least got the Josh Reynolds touchdown after touching on him on the Thanksgiving DFS show.
We sure did.
So QB, with all that in mind, are you going to do it? Are you going to go down to 5,300 in cash for a certain mobile QB who used to play his games about an hour and a half west of us?
No, I'm going to go up a little higher to the other mobile quarterback, Cam Newton. I think the other guy is in play, but I like Cam. He comes in as our top dollars per point value based on our projections and his $5,600 price tag. The guy scored 26 DraftKings points last week in his first start of the season, like 10 days after joining the team. Like super impressive for Cam to be able to look that good in his first start back with the Panthers. 10 carries, 46 yards, and a score. That's kind of what you're looking for if you're playing Cam. Looked pretty good as a passer too. Nothing amazing, but was pretty efficient. Got the ball to DJ Moore, got the ball to Christian McCaffrey. It's kind of all he needs to do is get the ball in those guys' hands, and he should have decent passing numbers. And the matchup against Miami's just kind of middling against the run and the pass, so nothing to worry about there.
Yeah, Tyrod Taylor, of course, is the other guy at 5,300, and I'm not going down there either. I feel better about Cam Newton in the same range. Taylor's in play. I wouldn't be shocked if they scored similarly or even if Taylor outscores him, but Cam Newton feels a little bit safer, at least for having more talent around him, the guys that you just mentioned. And like you said, the rushing's always there, 10 carries for 46 yards last week, but he also completed 78% of his passes in that return game, 189 yards, 2 touchdowns. We'll definitely take that. And this week he gets Miami, which opened the season as a tougher defense, but the Dolphins are now just 20th in overall defensive DVOA, 21st against the pass, 23rd in weighted DVOA. So it's a pretty positive matchup this week. And if you look further into our projections, there's actually a bigger gap between the ceilings that we have projected for Cam and Taylor than there are between their baseline projections.
Yeah, I think it was like 55% of Newton's passes last week went to either DJ Moore or Christian McCaffrey. So he kind of knows where to go with the football. I do think, Taylor being just below Newton there does make Taylor a good tournament play, because I think Cam is going to be much higher owned. But I do think Tyrod against the Jets, he has upside both in the passing game and on the ground. So I like that. I'm going to play Justin Herbert again in tournaments as I've been doing most of the season. If you look at, just go to Herbert's game logs on DraftKings, it's like prototypical tournament quarterback. He has 3 games with fewer than 16 DraftKings points. He has 4 games with over 30 DraftKings points. So he's really been the highest ceiling quarterback this season. So he always makes sense in tournaments. The other guy I'm going to look to in tournaments is Carson Wentz. It's been the Jonathan Taylor show the past couple weeks. The Tampa matchup, we see it usually push teams more towards the pass. I'm sure Indy will come out trying to run the ball, and there's a chance they have success. Maybe Taylor is just unstoppable. It's definitely possible, but there's also a potential that the Bucs jump out to a lead. Colts have more success passing in this matchup than they had the past couple of weeks. So I think Wentz at his price tag, he is 5,800, and then Michael Pittman at 5,600 comes in as our top value wide receiver. So I just think those two guys paired together, good value, good upside and gives you a bunch of money to spend elsewhere.
I'm not going to be getting to Carson Wentz here. He's just not been very good lately. And the Bucs have actually been much softer run defense since week 5 than you would expect that they are by looking at the overall numbers. They get Vita Vea back this week, most likely. But it was a dominant run D through the first 4 weeks. And since then, there have just been strong spots along with some mediocre spots. So, I think Jonathan Taylor will be fine. I think they'll run the ball plenty. And really, Carson Wentz worries me more just with how he's played. I'm also leaning toward Justin Herbert primarily at $6,600, fifth in salary among main slate quarterbacks, second in points per game. He's thrown for 350 plus yards and delivered more than 30 fantasy points in 2 of the past 3 games. He's got Austin Eckler as an option, who obviously, we talk about it on a regular basis. Most of the time, you're not going to stack a running back with the quarterback that you're playing, but Austin Eckler is not the typical running back. 6+ targets in 2 straight games and 4 of his past 5, and a positive matchup overall against this Broncos defense. Also, Keenan Allen's a very easy play. I mean, early in the season, it was him versus Mike Williams kind of sharing the target load, but it has been Keenan Allen dominantly in more recent games. I'm sure we'll talk more about him as we get down to the wide receiver section. The other guys that I'm going to look at here are Kirk Cousins against the Niners at 6,300, 6th among quarterbacks in fantasy points per game over the past 5 weeks, QB4 over the past 3 weeks, and the Niners are 22nd in pass defense DVOA versus 3rd against the run. Joe Burrow at 6,200 against Pittsburgh is the other guy I'm throwing in. Efficient in his first meeting with Pittsburgh this year. Only 18 pass attempts, but completed 14 of them, 78% passing, 9.6 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns. Didn't even have T. Higgins in that game, so does have T. Higgins now. He's still much cheaper than Jamar Chase, despite those two being close in targets. So that's a stack that I'm also going to work in.
Yeah, the Cousins one is definitely on my radar. He's just a good tournament play at quarterback because the target tree is so concentrated, between Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Maybe you can throw in Tyler Conklin if you want, but I think you focus on the wide receivers there. I think, Matt Ryan too is a little interesting to me. He's coming off 2 single-digit DraftKings points. Those games have come against Dallas and New England, who have been 2 of the better. Those teams ranked 7th and 2nd in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. Now Matt Ryan gets Jacksonville, who 31st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. I'd probably want to see Cordero Patterson back to play Ryan. There's just not enough weapons, I don't think, without Patterson for Ryan to have a ceiling game. But if he gets Patterson back, I think Ryan, low ownership, low price, might make some sense for tourneys.
Yeah, I think if we get Patterson back, I like Matt Ryan better than Carson Wentz as the let's see what happens and put in a YOLO lineup. Over at running back, do you have to choose between AJ Dillon and Daryl Henderson in that Green Bay Rams matchup this week? Or maybe Dillon is about to change his outlook for us depending on what happens with Aaron Jones.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can definitely play both those guys. I prefer Dillon if Aaron Jones is out. And if Jones is back, obviously you can't play Dillon in cash. You probably can't even play him in tournaments. So you could probably just pivot down to Henderson at that point. But Dillon basically had a floor game last week and put up 15.7 DraftKings points. The usage was all there. So his price is actually down $300 now to 5,900. So I think if Jones is out, Dillon's in my cash lineup. I'm also playing Christian McCaffrey in cash. He's up to 9,100 more than he was last week. Last week we got full Christian McCaffrey, 90% of the snaps, 90% of the pass routes, got 10 of the 11 running back carries and 8 targets, a 30% target share for McCaffrey. So he has 24 plus DraftKings points in all 4 of his full games this season. So I'm just going to lock that into my cash team.
Yeah, and his 3 games back from injury, RB14, RB4, RB3, the down game among those, which RB14 we can still work with. That would be disappointing at $9,000. But that was the game where Sam Darnold played against the Patriots. Only 4 catches for McCaffrey in that one. Of course, it was also his first game back. So reason for there to be downside. 8 targets last week, 7 catches with Cam Newton in the lineup. So a competent quarterback certainly helps. I think Daryl Henderson is certainly in play at 5,800. Salary is actually down on him to its lowest level since week 4. We've seen Sony Michel claim a larger share of the workload over the past 3 games than he had been getting before that. And there was one game in there, I can't remember which one at the moment, where Daryl Henderson left briefly for an injury issue. But We're also coming off 2 games of the Rams falling surprisingly behind Tennessee and San Francisco. I got to think that the bye week came at a good time for them to just kind of get things righted around, get some new players mixed in. Henderson's snap share also rebounded last week. The last time out versus the previous 2 games was in the 60% range for those previous 2, 75% playing time last time out. And the Packers are 26th in run defense DVOA, weak against running backs and tight ends in coverage. That makes sense when you look at a Green Bay defense. It's just kind of shaky at linebacker.
Yeah, Henderson just needs the Rams offense to bounce back. I think he's still the clear feature back there. You mentioned he did leave briefly with an injury like a few weeks ago. That Titans game, the Rams just got blown out and Michelle got some mop-up duty late. So I still think it's Henderson's backfield. So he's a good price at $5,800. The last guy I want to mention for cash just as a salary saver, Ty Johnson down at $4,300. Michael Carter's absence leaves the backfield. Ty Johnson and Tevin Coleman. I'm not sure where the carries are going to. I'm kind of projecting it to be a close to 50-50 split in terms of carries. That could get Ty Johnson 8 to 12 carries, but I think he should dominate passing game work. He's been good in that department this season. He has 25 catches, 271 yards, a 10.8 yards per catch average. He's 13th among 46 qualifying running backs in yards per route run. So I think he has a good, target pass catching projection this week for the price tag. And he gets the Texans, plus matchup. Houston 24th in adjusted points allowed to running backs.
I think Saquon Barkley at 6,300 is also still in the cash mix. The ankle adds a little bit of risk, but he didn't leave the game last week, made it through that game against the Bucs. Only 6 carries, of course, in that game that was fairly lopsided, but also 6 catches. And we have at least as many injury issues at wide receiver this week. Sterling Shepard still looks like he's not going to be ready to play. Now Kadarius Toney hasn't been able to practice to this point. So we'll see exactly what's there. But there should be plenty of targets available for Barkley in this full PPR format against Philly, especially a Philly defense that we've talked about is much friendlier to short range passing than it is for anything downfield.
Yeah, I like Barkley for cash, for tournaments. I don't think I could get there with cash. Just how crappy that Giants offense has been. Barkley didn't look right to me last week. He should be better in his second game back, and I think that's what makes him a good tournament play. But I just think there's too much downside for cash for me.
Yeah, I can understand that. GPP side, what else do you like at running back?
I like Chavontay Williams. Just kind of hoping this is like coming off the bye. Denver gives him, even like 60% of the backfield work, 65% of the backfield work. Melvin Gordon doesn't have to go away, but if Chavontay can pick up, an extra 4 or 5 carries, that'd be huge because he's been awesome all season. Gets this awesome matchup against the Chargers, dead last in Football Outsiders, run defense DVOA, and teams run against the Chargers. They face the 3rd most running back carries per game this season. They're 23rd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. I'm expecting a run-heavy game plan from Denver. And again, I think there's a chance you get 15 to 18 carries out of Williams in this game. And in that case, I think he definitely deliver at this price tag.
Yeah, and the Chargers are favored here. And if I had to bet one, I would probably bet the Chargers in this game. But it's definitely a game that Denver is capable of winning. So even if Chavontay Williams gets 50% or 45% of the carries in this game, he could certainly still have a good game and plenty of volume here.
For sure.
I think James Robinson at 6,200 is attractive. His playing time's been fine his past 2 games, coming off 3 straight Jaguars losses. The past 2 came against defenses at rank number 2 and number 3 in rushing DVOA. So this should be a good spot for James Robinson to get some work and to do some stuff with it. Jacksonville is just a 2-point underdog this week. So, they're going to be not the favorite in most cases, but they're capable of beating Atlanta, at the very least keeping this game close, which should help the workload. The Falcons, the 5th most generous running back defense by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. And 2 of the 4 defenses that are ahead of them in that category have already played this week. So an even better matchup versus the rest of the main slate. Over-under started at 51 points here, but it's down to 46. So I don't know if maybe that first number was not real or if it's come down. I know that some weeks there have been some numbers that was like, that was never actually the number. It's just the adjustment that kicked in.
Yeah, the Atlanta-Jacksonville game and the Jets-Texans game, 4 crappy offenses and 4 crappy defenses in it. So I'm trying to figure out whether those games are going to be, shootouts because the D's are so bad or just, slop fest because the offense are so bad. So I think that's kind of a key to the GPP side this week.
Yeah. And I think that James Robinson is kind of the one guy among all those teams where no matter how the games go, I feel pretty good about his chances, because I don't think Atlanta's going to blow out Jacksonville in this one. That might be the one scenario that would work poorly for him. But even then, maybe he gets some targets. He also dominated backfield touches the past 2 games. It hasn't been high in raw volume, but in terms of his share, it's been high. Cordarrelle Patterson, I think, will be interesting. 6,500 if he's good to go for this game. We'll watch him. Miles Sanders, I think, is worth talking about at 5,100. And he's only an option for me because Jordan Howard is out for this game. The matchup is terrific. The Giants are the 6th most friendly matchup for running back scoring by adjusted fantasy points allowed, and easily the biggest boost versus running backs compared with any other position. 30th in run defense DVOA. Jordan Howard, though, when he left last week's game with the knee injury, had more carries than Miles Sanders to that point. So it certainly helps that he's out. Boston Scott is still in the mix there. And I wonder, I started thinking about Miles Sanders at 5,100. He's going to score a touchdown at some point, but if Boston Scott is only 4K, I mean, is he actually the better play than Miles Sanders here?
What do our projections say? I think Sanders is a bit higher in dollars per point, right? I mean, I still think he's the bigger talent, and I do think he's going to lead in carries, maybe something like a 60-40 split in favor of Miles Sanders. I'm going to be playing Miles Sanders in tournaments. You mentioned the matchup against the Giants and Philly. I mean, the run heaviest offense in the league by a pretty wide margin over the last 4 or 5 weeks now. And they've been a good running offense. They're up to 3rd in Football Outsiders run offense DVOA. So, that with the matchup, I mean, it's just a total mismatch between this running offense and the Giants run defense. And again, I do think, you're looking at, probably 15 plus carries out of Sanders if this game goes according to script and the Eagles are able to run the ball as much as they want to.
Boston Scott also, by the way, played more passing down snaps than Miles Sanders last week. So I think both of these guys are in consideration in that tournament pool of running backs. And it's a great matchup for any part of the Philly offense against the Giants.
Yeah, I'm looking. They're both in the top 13 running backs for us in terms of value. Sanders is a couple spots ahead of Boston Scott.
Yeah, so it's a similar situation to the Denver duo where you can, consider all of them, and there's probably going to be enough workaround for everybody to potentially do something. Yep. Wide receiver for cash, Jared, what do you like?
So the first guy that sticks out to me is Chris Godwin at $7,000, and Mike Evans looks iffy for this game. He's dealing with back tightness according to Bruce Arians, and he didn't practice on Wednesday or Thursday. So we'll see later today about Evans. If he's out, I'm definitely using Godwin in cash. Even if Evans plays, I think Godwin is an option at $7,000. He is averaging over the last 4 games without Antonio Brown. Godwin's averaging 9.3 targets, 7.3 catches, 93 yards, and 0.8 touchdowns per game. The Colts are 26th in Football Outsider, 26th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. And then again, I'll mention on the other side of that game, Michael Pittman. The targets have been down lately. That's mostly because the Colts just haven't been throwing the ball much. Pittman still has a 22.6% target share on the season, 23% target share over the last 4 games. So if you just get, Wentz back up to 35 passes, that's going to be nice volume for Pittman at this price tag.
Yeah, I certainly think Pittman's in play. I think that he looks similar to some other guys in that range. Jalen Waddle, 5,900, who's had 9+ targets in 3 of 4, 8+ targets in 5 of his past 6 games. T. Higgins at 5,400, Brandon Cooks at 58, Brandon Aiyuk even at 5,300. I think all those guys are certainly in the same pool of consideration. And then up a little bit from Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen's $7,400 salary is his highest of the season, but it might still be underpriced for what he's been doing lately. He's $1,200 cheaper than Devonta Adams. He's seen 4 more targets than any other wideout over the past 3 weeks. And over the past 5, only Cooper Kupp and Marquis Brown match Keenan Allen in targets per game. Cooper Kupp costs $2,200 more in DK salary than Keenan Allen does this week. Brown still has a quad issue and he's not on the main slate. So Keenan Allen stands out up there as like a number 1 dominant target share level guy in a matchup that's, maybe it's not the greatest in the world, but it's also not at all scary against Denver at this point.
Yeah, the volume, I think Keenan's gone 11-13 targets over his last 4 games since the bye week. So I like him a lot. I do, I prefer Godwin straight up, I think, for the slight savings, but you could definitely play Keenan and Godwin in cash, or in any lineup if you go cheaper at running back and use a cheap quarterback.
Yeah, especially with some of the lower dollar running backs that we were talking about earlier, as well as Cam Newton down in that 5K range. GPP, what do you like for wideout?
Yeah, I'm going to give Laviska Shenault a chance here in GPPs. $4,400 actually checks in as our second best dollars per point value at wide receiver. I wouldn't mess with him in cash, but I do think GPP, he's worth a shot at this price tag. He's going to move. He should move back into the slot now. He did last week, with Jamal Agnew leaving that game. Agnew's out for the season. So Chenault's going to be, kind of back in his natural position. Gets the good matchup against Atlanta that we've talked about. The Falcons 23rd in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers.
I think that if you need a 4K receiver, you could consider him. I haven't really looked a whole lot at what else is down in that range or even the high 3Ks. But yeah, fingers crossed for Laviska Shenault that he has a Jamal Agnew game this week.
That's all we can hope for.
Deontay Johnson looks good at 6,600. I mean, I don't think that he's going to be sneaky, but he's in a range where there are lots of other guys around. So I could see him not being owned quite at the level that he should be. Salary for him is up 600 versus last week, but it's still under where it was for weeks 8, 9, and 10. 13 targets in 2 straight games for Johnson and 4 of his past 5 games. He's also an easy fit in Joe Burrow lineups or Joe Mixon lineups. If you happen to like Joe Mixon this week, we haven't talked about him at all. You can also pair, I think, Deontay Johnson with T. Higgins, though, in a lineup if you're not playing either quarterback from that game. Get some correlation between those guys there. I think because of the $1,800 difference between T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, I don't think I would play Jamar Chase without Burrow. But what do you think about that, Jared?
Is T. Higgins finally going to be low owned this week? Like, are people finally sick of him? Because I feel like, he's been disappointing, but his price has been so low and people have just been going back to him. He's been, pretty highly owned most of the weeks this season. But I'm going to go back to T. Higgins. And I'm with you. I'd only be playing Chase this week in a Joe Burrow lineup.
Mm-hmm. I had trouble finding much else to get excited about at wideout. I tried, really the closest I could come up with was Adam Thielen, down at, I believe it's 6,700 for him. The salary has rebounded since dropping down into the 5K range earlier this year, but it's still short of where Thielen opened the season. He's $1,600 cheaper than Justin Jefferson. It's a positive matchup, as I mentioned, with Kirk Cousins for passing upside. And Thielen's got 3 games of 19.8 DK points or more among his past 5. So we've had Justin Jefferson do the big stuff lately, but it hasn't necessarily left Adam Thielen without, with just scraps.
Yeah, and I think you think of Thielen as a touchdown or bust guy, but he's seen nice volume. He's only dipped below 7 targets once all season. He has 9+ targets in 3 of his last 5 games now. So he's been closer to Jefferson in volume than I think people realize. So he's a nice play. I'm with you though. It is kind of a weak week at wide receiver. There's not a ton to like. I do have Brandon Cooks here though for tournaments. Coming off 2 disappointing games in the box score. The volume was down last week as well, but go back 2 games ago, he saw 14 targets. He's still the clear focal point of this Texans passing game, and it's the best matchup Houston will see all year against the Jets. So I think Cooks definitely has rebound potential this week.
And that was 14 targets in Tyrod Taylor's return to the lineup in that game. So last week, certainly, I don't think we're going to see too many more games go game flow wise for Houston the way they did last week. One guy on the negative side, I'm going to fade Elijah Moore this week in Zach Wilson's return to the lineup, especially now that his salary is up some.
Yeah, curious to see his ownership, but unless he's like 5% owned or less, in that case, I might be worth a shot because I do think he's awesome and the matchup is good. But yeah, there's definitely some unknown. We haven't seen Elijah Moore's done it with Mike White and Joe Flacco. He hasn't done it with Zach Wilson yet.
That's right. It would probably help him if Corey Davis doesn't play this week, but there's just some unknown there, and it's not like he's down in the 4K range. Right. So I'll probably let other people do it, and I'll sit back and enjoy whatever he does for my best ball teams.
Exactly.
Tight end for cash, Jared. What are you favoring?
Man, it's going to be tough for me to get away from Gronk. I'm playing him in cash, and he might end up being in all of my tournament lineups as well. We'll see what the ownership comes in at. I mean, I got to imagine he's going to be popular, but he's $4,400. He comes in, he checks in as not only our best value at tight end, but our best value at any flex eligible position. So you could use Gronk at flex this week. I think $4,400 Gronk makes sense as a flex play. He has in his 4 full games this season, 29, 19.9, 9.5, and 13.1 DraftKings points. He has 8 targets in 3 of those 4 games. He's 4th among all tight ends in expected fantasy points per game. And he gets the Colts, who are dead last in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Football Outsiders has the Colts 24th in tight end coverage.
Yeah, he stands out. There are other guys in that 4K range, I think, that can come close to him in floor. Dan Arnold at 4K, Tyler Higbee at 42,
Yep.
Pat Freiermuth at 43, and then Dallas Goedert at 48. But it's tough to say that any of those guys challenges Rob Gronkowski on upside, especially this week against the Colts. So I agree there. On the GPP side, I'm going to play some Evan Engram at $3,800. So finally, the Giants offense got bad enough Monday night that they fired Jason Garrett after that one. And if I'm a new play caller for the Giants, one of the key things that I see in looking at the Giants offense for something that needs to change is like, oh, we have this tight end who is a standout athletically versus everybody else at the position league wide and has barely been getting used. And oh, by the way, he's one of the few guys that has any physical ability that's actually healthy right now. Let's try to get him the ball, perhaps even throw it downfield to him and see what happens. And I mean, beyond that, Kyle Rudolph is also dealing with an ankle injury. So even if nothing changes on that front, there should be more opportunity for Engram just by virtue of injuries around him. And especially when you look at a slate that really doesn't have a whole lot left at tight end. Travis Kelce's on bye, Darren Waller, Mark Andrews are off the main slate, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz, Dawson Knox already played. I think there's going to be plenty of attention for George Kittle and Kyle Pitts. Evan Engram, I think, has similar ultimate upside if all those guys got the same targets in a given week, and he gets a Philly defense that's 31st in tight end coverage.
All right, so you're going back to your boy Engram. I'm going to go back to my boy Higbee, who I've been playing all season. So I think you mentioned Tyler Higbee and Pat Freiermuth. I think those two guys priced right below Rob Gronkowski, assuming Gronk soaks up like most of that ownership in the mid to low fours, and Higbee and Freiermuth come in single digits. I do think they're good tournament plays. Higbee's route participation remains elite, and I think that's going to continue with Robert Woods out. We'll see how much bigger of a role Odell Beckham is ready for, but I do think Higbee's he's gonna be on the field, and I think the Rams offense bounces back. So there's upside there. And then Freiermuth, he's just been good now for a while, and he gets a boost with Eric Ebron out. We've seen Freiermuth's route rates climb without Ebron this season, and Ebron's at least going to miss this week, if not the rest of the year.
Yep, I like that. I'll be talking about Pat Freiermuth on the FanDuel show as well. Defense, and it was about to start with $2,200 Jacksonville for me, but in looking at it, I think I like the Texans at 2,300 better against the Jets. They're up to 10th in defensive DVOA for the season, 6th against the pass. So the Houston defense, you can't look at it and say any reason why it's decent, but it's been decent this year. And they're facing the Jets, not only the Jets, but Zach Wilson's about to play his first game since week 7. Doesn't seem like Corey Davis is on track to be ready for this game. So it's a high upside matchup and a defense that's been surprisingly decent.
Yeah, and Houston has 15 and 16 DraftKings points in their last 2 games now. So they've been producing in fantasy lately. You mentioned Zach Wilson being back in his first 5 games of the season. He took 3.6 sacks per game and threw 1.8 interceptions per game. So, he's been kind of a dream matchup for opposing defenses. So I do prefer Houston over Jacksonville as that super cheap D. Kind of up a tier, I like Cincinnati at 2,700. I still think attacking Ben Roethlisberger makes sense this season. These teams met back in week 3, and the Bengals had 4 sacks, 2 takeaways, gave up just 10 points. They scored 12 DraftKings points that game.
Yeah, the Bengals defense hasn't been good, but it's been better than what we've seen the past few years. So there's some stuff to like there. It's not a week with a whole lot to like on defense either. The top 8 in our DK dollars per point projections all cost less than $2,700, or I'm sorry, $2,700 or less in salary this week. 10 of our top 11 come in cheaper than 2,900. So it's all cheap defenses. I think if we're looking for raw upside, just the ultimate ceiling fantasy points wise, I like the Eagles at 3,200 against the Giants. And then the Patriots, of course, at 3,900 against Tennessee, especially with AJ Brown looking iffy for that game.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever played a $3,900 defense. So I'm sure I won't get up to the Patriots. I do like the I do like the Eagles against the Giants at 3,200. I like Carolina too. I've been playing them in cash the past few weeks. They're finally priced up kind of to where they should be now at $3,100, but I still think it's a good defense. And Miami is 26th in DK points allowed to defenses, so a good matchup for Carolina this week.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this Week 12 DraftKings podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. You can get more player recommendations. If you're a DS Insider, you can check out Jared's cash game picks, as well as top GPP options from Corey Bushland. You can also mess around with the lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and FanShare ownership projections. For more discussion of DFS and other formats, you can also join the free DraftSharks Discord. You can find the link for that in the description for this podcast. If you're on the stream with us right now, stick around. We're going to take a brief break. Then we will fire up the FanDuel side. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, November 26th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 12 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And this podcast is sponsored by our partners at FanShare Sports. FanShare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com. And you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at fansharesports.com. Jared, over on FanDuel this week for QB, what are you liking?
We can't play Cam, I don't think. FanDuel priced him up to $8,000. He's like the second or third highest priced quarterback on the main slate. There's no standout quarterback play for me this week on FanDuel. If Mike Evans is a full go with the back issue, I think Tom Brady at $8,200 is a nice play if he has, Evans, Godwin, and Gronk at least. He gets a Colts defense that's been a pass funnel this season. They're second in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA, but 20th against the pass, and they're 31st in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. If Evans is out, though, I don't think I'd want to pay up that much for Brady. In that case, I'd probably go down to Joe Burrow. $7,100 for Burrow seems like a decent price. He had 172 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Steelers in week 3 on just 18 pass attempts. That was back in September when Cincinnati was still going super run heavy. Burrow should throw it quite a bit more in the rematch. And the Steelers just, they haven't been a good pass defense. Football Outsiders has them 26th in pass D, and they're 21st in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks.
Yeah, FanDuel is clearly like, we're not going to let Cam Newton run things around here, because last week too, last week he came off the street and started. I guess he wasn't off the street because he, played Taysom Hill the week before, but he came off the street for his first start of the season and was $7,500 in salary last week. That's the same as what Kirk Cousins costs this week. As you mentioned, Newton's up to $8,000. So, can he work out for you? Sure. But I'm also not leaning that way for $8K in cash. I like the range of Joe Burrow, $7,100, Kirk Cousins, $7,500, Justin Herbert, $7,800. I don't expect any of those guys to kill me this week, and I think they all have similar upside. I guess probably Justin Herbert leads the way in ceiling, but like all of those players, they're all relatively safe. As I mentioned, they've all displayed that upside throughout the season. They all have attractive stacking options. So as you said, nothing jumps out to me immediately, but that's the range of quarterbacks that I'm primarily considering, especially because they're all 400 plus cheaper than Tom Brady and all 600 plus cheaper than Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, man, I love Herbert. He'd worry me in cash a bit though, just because we've seen him dud. He has three duds this season. But I love him in tournaments because he has the massive ceiling. He has 4 games of 30 plus FanDuel points this season. So I'm definitely going to be playing Justin Herbert in tournaments. And again, I like Carson Wentz here, $7,300. I just think it's been all Jonathan Taylor the past couple of weeks. And I do think, some of that production is going to start swinging back to the passing game. And this is definitely a good week for it against, a good Bucs run defense. And the Colts are 3-point underdogs here. There's a chance they fall behind, and Carson Wentz has to throw it 35 plus times here.
Just the way that Carson Wentz has played lately, if Jonathan Taylor doesn't have a big game, I think that the Colts get dominated in this game.
Wentz been that bad?
Yeah, he has been. He's been.
I guess I believe you because it's Carson Wentz, but
he's been sub 200 yards passing the past 2 weeks, including one against Jacksonville. Some of it was against the Bills last week when they just didn't throw much. They had 20 pass attempts, but a bad one against Jacksonville a week before. And we talked about it before. A couple weeks before that, he had a good fantasy line, but a bad outing against, I think it was San Francisco.
Yeah, he was bad in the Jags game. I'm looking now. He is near the bottom in PFF passing grades over the past 5 weeks. So I'm playing for the bounce back, though. We've seen
All
it. We've
right.
seen it before.
I won't root against him because I still like Carson Wentz, but he's not going to be somebody that I go to here. I am still mixing it up with Joe Burrow, Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert for all the reasons I mentioned for cash on the GPP side. I think they all have the upside to go along with the floor. I'm more considering Tom Brady here than I am on the cash side because the salary matters less than the ultimate ceiling. I do think Mike Evans' status matters, but we can get a good Tom Brady game even with Gronk and Chris Godwin as his primary weapon. So that won't sway me too much looking at Mike Evans' status heading into the weekend. I think I'm less likely to play Jalen Hurts if his ownership projection comes in close to what I would expect following a 3 rushing touchdown game last week. It's just he's got a volatile profile, and the rushing is always going to help, but he's also not usually going to score multiple rushing touchdowns, certainly not going to score 3. And there are going to be weeks where he doesn't score at all on the ground. And he's also showed us recently the downside he has if he doesn't happen to run for a touchdown.
Right. I mean, we love the rushing production out of quarterbacks, but it's scary to pay that much for a quarterback who we're projecting to throw like 20 times in that game against the Giants.
Mm-hmm. Running back for cash, what do you like?
So AJ Dillon right now pops as our top dollars per point value at running back. And, that's assuming Aaron Jones does not play. It sounds like Jones has a chance to return this week. So if that's the case, Dillon's out of consideration. But if Jones is out, I think $6,900 for Dillon is a great price. He played 75% of the Packers' offensive snaps last week, got 11 of the 15 running back carries, and got 6 targets. Decent matchup here, too, against the Rams. They're 18th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. So, kind of a middling defense. And I'm just going to pay up for Christian McCaffrey here on FanDuel, even at $9,700. Part of it's because he's just super safe, especially now that he's back in a full-time role. He played 90% of the Panthers snaps last week, but also because there's just no other standout running backs to me. There's some other decent options, but no one that screams big time value to me. So I'm just going to plug in CMC and take his 20 points.
Isn't he down from last week? Wasn't he 10K on FanDuel in week 11?
I think he was. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, even $9,700 is like a relative savings for him, even though he's coming off a good game. So yeah, it's tough to not get some Christian McCaffrey here. I agree on the Dillon stuff. I think Daryl Henderson's in play at 7,300. I don't think he's quite as attractive on FanDuel as he is on DraftKings for the relative pricing. I think Chavontay Williams at 5,700 is cash viable this week on FanDuel. He played his highest snap share of the season his last time out before the bye last week. And then the game before that had 17 carries in the win at Dallas, 6+ yards per rush in each of his past 2 games. I mentioned on the DK show that the Chargers are slight favorites, and that's who I would bet if I had to pick. But I think that Denver is capable of winning this game. So I think they should be able to run the ball plenty, barring the Chargers just jumping out to a huge early lead. The Chargers defense remains dead last in rushing DVOA, and there's more space between them and the next worst run defense, the Jets, than there is between the Jets and number 30, the Giants. So great spot for Chavontay Williams. Only the Seahawks have faced more running back carries per game than the Chargers so far.
Yeah, I have Chavontay down here as a tournament target, but I'm with you. I do think he's a cash option at that price tag. Kind of the same deal for me with Miles Sanders at $6,100. I think he's probably better in tournaments, but I do think he's a pretty safe bet for 15+ carries on Sunday. Philly's been super run heavy offense for the past 4 or 5 weeks now. The Giants are a bad run defense. Philly shouldn't fall behind in this game. That they should be playing with a lead, so they should be able to run the ball. And no Jordan Howard for Philly. So now it's down to Miles Sanders and Boston Scott. We'll see if Kenneth Gainwell does anything, but I think it's going to be Sanders and Scott divvying up most of the carries.
Yeah, I would lean Williams between them because I think he has a better shot at finding the end zone without Jalen Hurts to get in the way. But I definitely agree that Miles Sanders is in consideration here.
Yep.
I like Elijah Mitchell as a primary target. He seems like he's trending toward playing. We'll watch to make sure that that's the case. We're doing this Friday morning, so I apologize if he is not an option by the time you listen to this. But if he's not, then Jeff Wilson Jr. is. So $6,800, probably not quite cheap enough to make Elijah Mitchell, a hugely owned running back this week, especially coming off a game missed and especially coming off a game where Jeff Wilson got 19 carries. But the last time we saw Mitchell on the field, he carried 27 times versus 10 for Wilson. So I expect that he would take the backfield back over. The Vikings are 27th in run defense DVOA, 8th against the pass. So it's a run favoring defensive matchup. And those Vikings have lost Everson Griffin for at least this week. Got some mental health stuff going on that's going to keep him out of this game. That only further weakens an already shaky D-line group for Minnesota. So I think it's a good spot for Eli Mitchell in an offense that wants to run the ball anyway, and only helping that the Niners are 3.5-point favorites in this game. Mitchell's played in 4 of San Francisco's 5 victories to this point. He has logged at least 17 carries in each of those games and gone for 90+ rushing yards in 3 of the 4.
Yeah, I like that call. I do expect Mitchell to be back as the clear leader in that backfield once he's over the finger issue. Jeff Wilson just wasn't very effective in that game against Jacksonville last week. I like the other side of that game too, Dalvin Cook. I'm curious to see the ownership on him, but $8,100 seems pretty cheap for a back of his caliber and a guy who's been getting workhorse usage. Cook has 20+ opportunities in all 7 of his healthy games this season, and he has 25+ opportunities in 5 of those 7 games. So he's been getting all the volume. He's gotten kind of unlucky in the touchdown department so far this season. It's kind of underachieved there, but that could easily flip. He could score 2 or 3 times this week. So if Cook's not going to be chalky at $8,100, I like him quite a bit for tourneys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that too. And even though San Francisco plays the run better than the pass, it's not a scary run defense especially for a player like Dalvin Cook. I'm also curious to see what the ownership projection is on Jonathan Taylor, because last week we got him down in the single digits. And then of course he destroyed that Buffalo matchup. So if he's in the single digits again, it's definitely worth playing some Jonathan Taylor against anybody at this point.
Yeah, I'm mad we didn't highlight or think about Jonathan Taylor as a tournament playoffs league. It was really a perfect situation. I mean, we saw Buffalo give up the big game to Derrick Henry a few weeks earlier. So they've been susceptible to those stud backs.
I cashed a tournament team last week for basically only the reason that I played Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I don't think it was possible to not cash if you had JT last week.
That's right. Wide receiver for cash. What are you playing on FanDuel this week?
So Devonta Adams, again, I think for the 3rd or 4th straight week, pops as our top dollars per point value at wide receiver. Hopefully you played him last week. If you played him in cash last week, I'm sure you won. So I think going back to him again makes sense. Down a bit further, I think Chris Godwin at $7,600, especially if Mike Evans is out. Godwin's going to be such a good volume bet for that price tag. Even if Godwin plays, even if Evans plays, Godwin's averaged 9.3 targets per game over the last 4 weeks without Antonio Brown. I think that's kind of what you'd project for him this week if Evans is in. And then Keenan Allen down a bit farther at $7,000. Keenan Allen in 4 games since the Chargers bye, his targets have gone 11, 13, 11, 13. He's averaging 8.8 catches and 98 yards per game over that 4-game stretch. So, early on, it was kind of Allen and Mike Williams, 1A, 1B. We've kind of gone back now to Allen as the clear focal point of that passing game.
Yeah, and if you look at the pricing, it seems like his pricing matches up with his production, or even is a little bit ahead of his production. He's tied for 10th in wide receiver pricing on this main slate, 12th in points per game at the position, but he's had 4 straight games over his season scoring average and only 1 touchdown in that span. So it hasn't been a luck-driven, scoring spike lately. It's been the workload spike that you just mentioned. 3 straight games of 8+ catches and 98+ yards. So yeah, I like Keenan Allen at 7,000 as a foundation player in cash lineups this week. I also like Deontay Johnson at 7,100. Cincinnati's 19th in pass defense DVOA. I think Cincinnati's likely to play with a lead in this game and motivate Pittsburgh passing volume. Bengals are 4-point favorites in this one. Pittsburgh attempted 58 passes in the first meeting against Cincinnati this year. So we know it's possible to get high volume, and Deontay Johnson's just done really well on target volume lately, including 13 targets each of the past 2 weeks. So 7,100 is a pretty good price for him.
Yep. Can never go wrong with Deontay with that target volume.
I think down in the 6K range, some guys to consider: T. Higgins, 6,200, Devontae Smith, 6,400, DJ Moore, 6,700. I think QB still a question mark, but Cam Newton looked more competent last week than what we've gotten for a while with Carolina. Plus, DJ Moore got 26% target share in that game, that first start for Cam Newton. He got his highest catch rate since week 5. Now gets the Dolphins, who are the second friendliest wide receiver matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed.
Yes, I had Moore down here as a tournament play. I think he's not going to get back to the level of volume we saw early this season because, the Panthers early on were going super pass heavy, but I do think he could get back to the type of efficiency he was posting early on when Sam Darnold was actually playing well. And you mentioned this matchup against Miami. So I think good time to get back on DJ Moore right now.
Mm-hmm. Tournament side, do you have anything else beyond DJ Moore?
Michael Pittman here, as the stack with Carson Wentz. His volume has been down lately just because the Colts haven't been throwing it much, but Pittman still has a 22.5% target share on the season, actually up a bit to 23% over the last 4 games. So he's still the clear number 1 wide receiver here. So, if Wentz needs to throw it 35 plus times in this game, Pittman should be the guy who benefits most.
Mm-hmm. I highlighted Adam Thielen on the DraftKings show. I think on FanDuel, I like paying up for Justin Jefferson at 8,100 versus Thielen at 7,200. Both guys are in play. And in a Cousins lineup, I would play both of those wideouts rather than going to Tyler Conklin or anybody else. It's been the Niners matchup hasn't been great for tight ends this year. So I'd rather play both Jefferson and Thielen here. Jefferson has a 6 target lead over Adam Thielen for the season. Thielen still leads by 2 touchdowns. So, again, both guys are in play, but Jefferson has been the higher ceiling guy lately. And then Brandon Cooks, Jared, you mentioned him on the DK show, but at 6,500 here, he'd be kind of an easy player to lose sight of. Just 3 targets, 2 catches last week, but 4 straight games before that with 5+ receptions. That included Tyrod Taylor's week 9 return against Miami, 14 targets for Brandon Cooks in that game. So, still a focal point for that offense, and an offense that I think we expect to have to throw the ball a lot more most weeks than they did last week.
Hopefully, right? I mean, I guess that's the concern here is the Jets offense doesn't show up and Houston is able to, pound Rex Burkhead into the line 18 times again. But yeah, I like Cooks as a tournament play in this matchup and with the volume that we can project him for.
Yeah, and that concern, I think, is what would keep me from playing Brandon Cooks on the cash side. I would prefer those other 6K guys over Brandon Cooks.
Yep, agreed.
Tight end for cash, what are you playing?
I'm going to go to Dan Arnold, coming off a goose egg, but I'm not too worried about it. He had averaged 7.6 targets over his previous 5 games. Now you have Jamal Agnew out of the picture. Agnew had been averaging 6.3 targets per game. A lot of that short stuff, that Arnold should kind of pick up. So $5,100 for Dan Arnold. Good matchup against Atlanta. I think he makes sense in cash, despite last week's goose egg.
Yeah, I can't argue against Dan Arnold. I prefer Pat Freiermuth at 5,300 as a starting point in that similar range. 7+ targets in 5 straight games for him now, 4+ catches in each of those games, 4 touchdowns over that span. I think that's probably an area. There's always luck involved in that, but I think that's an area he's probably going to carry more upside than Dan Arnold going forward. Cincinnati just 22nd in tight end coverage DVOA on the season. Eric Ebron might be done for the season. We'll see. At the very least, he's out for now with a knee injury. And the Steelers have been good in passing volume, 5th in pass attempts for the season, 14th in yards. Jaguars 14th and 24th respectively in those categories. Pittsburgh, as I mentioned, attempted 58 passes in the first meeting with Cincinnati. I could certainly see, I wouldn't bet on 58 again, but I could certainly see 40+ in another game that I think Cincinnati should be the better team.
Yeah, I think Freiermuth is definitely a better touchdown bet than Dan Arnold. I'd probably still give the target projection edge to Arnold slightly, but it's close enough. I think the Fryer is a good play in cash and a good play in tournaments.
GPP side, what do you like?
So Rob Gronkowski on FanDuel is actually priced up. He's $6,500. So he's not nearly as big a value on FanDuel as he is on DraftKings. I think that makes him a better tournament play on FanDuel. I think his ownership should be much lower than it's going to be on DraftKings. Gronk's just been productive and he's been busy from a target standpoint when he's been healthy this season. Gronk is 4th among tight ends in expected fantasy points per game. So he's been getting, elite usage for the position. And now he gets the Colts, who are dead last in adjusted points allowed to tight ends.
Yeah, this is one spot where I'll let the ownership projections kind of drive me a little bit. I'm not going to, be a slave to it, but I'll look at it because there's no single player or two that stand out above everybody else. Kyle Pitts, I think, is attractive in that same range as Rob Gronkowski. Gets a similarly good matchup. Jacksonville's 30th in tight end coverage DVOA, according to Football Outsiders. So I like the upside on Pitts. I like the upside on Rob Gronkowski, whose matchup we've already talked about. I like Pat Freiermuth in the mix here for the reasons we just mentioned. I'm not as high on taking a shot with Evan Engram as I am on DK because he doesn't offer quite the salary savings versus these other players as he does on DraftKings this week. And I think the touchdown luck is more important for FanDuel than it is on DraftKings. And that's the area where I'm not going to bet on a rebound until I have a reason to do so.
Yeah, I agree. Ingram definitely a better play on DraftKings. I like the Pitts call. I like the Friday Moves call. I'm going to play Tyler Higbee again too here, $5,400. 96% of the routes in the Rams last game, the first one without Robert Woods. I really think Higbee's going to stay up near there the rest of the season. And he gets the Packers on Sunday. Green Bay, 25th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends and 26th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings.
I need to just start saying, Jared, who are you playing besides Tyler Higbee at tight end this week?
That works.
On defense, I'm going to start with the Bengals at $3,300. They're decent in DVOA, 15th overall, 20th in weighted DVOA, so haven't been as good lately. But their best DVOA performance of the season came in week 3 against Pittsburgh. So we know that possibility is there. We've seen the Steelers struggle at times. The 2 worst performances came against the Jets and Browns within the past 3 games. So there's definitely downside risk to the Bengals here, but that's at least baked into the price. They did have a rebound against Vegas last week. The Bengals top our FanDuel dollars per point. I'm good with them as my starting point on defense.
Yes, the Bengals would be my cash play on defense at that price tag. Tournament side, I do think going up $100 to the Dolphins at $3,400 makes some sense. Again, 4 tournaments. You need Miami to jump out to a lead on Carolina. Otherwise, you're just going to get 35 carries between Christian McCaffrey and Cam Newton. But if Miami does jump out to a lead and Newton has to drop back 30 plus times, there's some upside here. Miami is a blitzing defense. They're pretty opportunistic when it comes to takeaways. Miami has recent games of 17 and 18 FanDuel points, so they have been a high upside defense, really dating back for the past couple seasons now. So I do think in tournaments, I expect Miami to be low owned because I think people are going to go to the Bengals down there.
Yeah, I think the Chargers at 3,400 are a very similar profile in that things could go poorly and we could get 40 rushing attempts between Melvin Gordon and Chavontay Williams, or the Chargers could jump out to a lead. Teddy Bridgewater will throw the ball a lot and he will be susceptible to sacks and turnovers. So definitely only a tournament play. I would look at the Chargers here. If there's salary left, I like the Eagles at 4,300 against the Giants. The Bucks at 4,200 against the Colts are an option. And then if you really have some disposable salary available, it's going to take quite a bit to get to the Patriots at 5,000 against the Titans. Probably not a move I'm making, but depending on how the build ends up going, if that money is there, I think the upside is there for that matchup for it to make sense.
Yeah, always a bit easier to pay up for defenses on FanDuel. But I think Philly at 4,300 is as high as I'm going to go. Been a pretty good defense this season, and Daniel Jones always gives you upside.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to do it for this Week 12 FanDuel podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. You can get more player recommendations. Kevin English has your cash game picks for FanDuel this weekend. Corey Bushland has your top GPP options. And then you can play around with the lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and FanShare ownership projections. For more discussion of DFS and other formats, you can also join the free DraftSharks Discord. You can find the link to do that in the description for this podcast. For Jared Small and the rest of the DraftSharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.